Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome, to the introduction video of my Dreamcast Roundup. Before I start with showing you games from the Dreamcast era or from the lineup of the Dreamcast, I thought I want to tell you guys a little bit about the Dreamcast, about the history, about how the Dreamcast was doing, and a few speculations why the Dreamcast failed as it unfortunately did in its short life cycle. I'm pretty sure that some people that watch my channel are young. So I guess there are some people that don't really have any, don't really have any connection with the Dreamcast or something like that. So I thought before we start with the gaming roundup videos, I'm gonna sit myself down for the next 10 minutes. And guys, you know me, if I say 10 minutes, it will be at least an hour, and talk a little bit about the Sega Dreamcast. So what is there to say about the Sega Dreamcast? Before we go to some hard facts and whatever, what is there to say about the Sega Dreamcast? I think when people talk about the Sega Dreamcast, especially the people that experienced the Sega Dreamcast, most people that had a Sega Dreamcast remember the times with the Dreamcast, and they have fond and good memories about this console. I think there are barely people that owned the Dreamcast. First of all, there were really barely people that owned the Dreamcast. That's a sad fact. But there are barely people that owned the Dreamcast that actually didn't like the Dreamcast. A few facts right now. As you can see on the screen right now, we have 3 dates there. These are pretty much the release dates of the Dreamcast in the correspondent regions. So on the 27th November in '98, the Dreamcast came out in Japan. And then almost 10 months later, you could say, the Dreamcast came out in the US. Like, I would say we barely have something like that anymore in the current video game industry, but I'm wrong. Because if we look at the Xbox One and PlayStation 4, they actually had a pretty long delayed release cycle of their consoles too in certain regions. Didn't the Xbox One came out like in 14 regions, and then, I don't know, which country got the Xbox One like 2 years later or something like that? I don't know anymore. But for back in the day, this was obviously normal that consoles got released with an extremely big gap between regions. Obviously, Japan was mostly the first, then the US, and then Europe. In the US, the Dreamcast came out on the 9th September, and in Europe on the 14th October. And I have to make a little bit of a criticism here right now. I was obviously gathering some information and double-checking some information because, let's be honest, my brain is big, but it could be that I bring some stuff, that I mix up some stuff too. So I was actually wanting to double-check like the date of the European release of the Dreamcast. So I was going to game FAQs because they have dates everywhere. And they were actually saying that the Dreamcast in Europe came out on the 14th September of '99. And I was like saying to myself, what the fuck? No, it didn't come out on the 14th September '99. It came out on the 14th October '99. So I was double checking a few sources. And yes, it came out on the 14th October of '99. So a little bit of a criticism here. A big ass site like Game FAQs can't get their facts straight about the release of the Dreamcast. Well, I guess it's because it's a fucking American site and they don't give a fuck about fucking European releases. So but I obviously don't want to make a rant about Game FAQs right now. Go to Wikipedia or some other sites if you want to have some information. Always double check information that you search up on the internet. But as you can see with the dates, the Dreamcast kind of came in the PlayStation N64 in the PlayStation N64 generation. Like, it was the last console in this generation. PlayStation obviously came out in '95 in US and I think '94, end of '94 in Japan. And N64 came out in '96 in US, '96 in Japan, and I think even in '96 in US and '97 in Europe. So the Dreamcast kind of was the late bloomer of these consoles, and many people consider the Dreamcast actually like in the middle of generations. The Dreamcast came out in the generation of PlayStation 1 and 64, But at the same time, the Dreamcast was able to hold its place in the PlayStation 2 slash Xbox slash GameCube generation. Hell, at one point, Dreamcast games actually looked better than PlayStation 2 games, but we're probably gonna come to that later. What is this Dreamcast Roundup about? Well, the Dreamcast Roundup is about, like, I had a format back in the day that was called First 30, First 60, or First 15, where I decided I'm gonna play a game for 15 minutes, show a game for 15 minutes. Like, the Dreamcast Roundup is pretty much a first look format, only that it's not really a first look. It's me wanting to show you pretty much Dreamcast gems and not gems of this console. The Dreamcast was revolutionary in a lot of things, and I think when I checked like the Dreamcast videos on YouTube, there are not that many satisfactory Dreamcast videos in my personal opinion. So I kind of decided that I kind of want to make a Dreamcast roundup where I take myself like, let's say 20 till 30 minutes per game, and I'm gonna show you certain games. Right now I want to show you all the games that I have in my collection, and ladies and gentlemen, that's a lot. I have a ton of PAL games, I have a bunch of US games, and a ton of Japanese games. There are even many games in my collection that I only played for like 5 minutes, because at one point you were able to get Dreamcast games as fucking, I don't know, as fucking sugar in a convenience store for cheap money. But I'm gonna come to that in a second too. So the Dreamcast Roundup will be little bits and pieces of games, mostly from the beginning of the game, because I don't have saves anymore and shit like that. So the Dreamcast Roundup kind of will contain, like, it's kind of a first look format, but only with Dreamcast games. But I wanted to call it Roundup because, you know, I kind of want to show you like the first 30 minutes of every game and what games are there, what are the best games, what are the most terrible games, what are the most bizarre games when it comes to Dreamcast. Believe me, ladies and gentlemen, the Dreamcast has a lot of bizarre games, and yeah, that's kind of what I want to do. Talking about video games, the Dreamcast pretty much has a total amount of, I think, again, like, getting a total amount of games is, again, a double-edged sword, because I think with a small library like the Dreamcast, it's easier to point down. But obviously, knowing 100% how many games there are is obviously, like, you never know for sure, you know. Some games of the Dreamcast only sold like a few thousand times. Like, if you think about it right now, with games that sell in the millions and in the millions, there were fucking Dreamcast games that only had a production run of 5,000 copies or something like that. And that worldwide, so we definitely talk about different times here. But it seems that the official list of games on Dreamcast that came out across all the regions, across all years, because there is a pretty active Dreamcast development even after the death of the console, seems to be 638 games. Here you have a picture right now that pretty much shows a complete PAL collection of Dreamcast games, and this is not a picture of my collection, but I would almost say that I almost have, like, I don't have a complete Dreamcast collection, but my PAL collection actually kind of looks like this. So this Dreamcast Roundup will be a long-running series where I kind of want to upload a video every single day, and I'm not planning on showing you all 638 games. But it could be that you at least will see a third. You will see a lot of Japanese obscure games that I actually bought for like cheap money at one point, and have myself no fucking idea what they're about. There are obviously some visual novel style games that I probably only show for like 5 minutes or something like that, because if you don't fucking understand Japanese, there's no fucking reason for you to play them. But at one point you were able to get Dreamcast games so cheap that, you know, oh, there's a Japanese game, new and sealed for €2. Okay, I'm gonna buy it, you know. Like, what I did with the Dreamcast in types of games is so fucking retarded if you think about it. But at one point, because the Dreamcast was dying so fast and because Sega wanted to get all the shit out, you were able to get Dreamcast games for so fucking ridiculous cheap. There were times where you were able in Germany to get like Shenmue for, I think, $10 or something like that. New and sealed copies of Shenmue for $10. They had like 50 on the shelf and said, here, $10 per game. Like, if I think about it now, if I would have bought all of these 50 Shenmue copies and would sell them right now, new and sealed on eBay, I would have made an extreme bonus. But obviously, back in the day, you didn't think that far. But yeah, out of these 638 games, we will probably, like this Dreamcast Roundup, it has an open end, you know. I want to concentrate on all types of games. I want to show you bad games. I want to show you good games. I want to show you obscure games. I want to show you games that no one knows of, you know. So I don't really have a count for how many games I'm gonna show. But yeah, there is definitely, I would say, there will be at least 150 plus games shown on this Dreamcast Roundup. On this Dreamcast Roundup series. So be ready for a lot of content. And yeah, what I have to say about that's another thing that that is not really satisfactory for me on YouTube. If you go to YouTube, you will mostly see Dreamcast footage from an emulator. And now comes the point where I have to give you a warning, ladies and gentlemen. The video quality of the gameplay will not be really good. About emulators, like, I'm a big fan of emulators. You can look at me how you want. It's not because of piracy. It's not because I'm a fucking cheap prick or something like that. I'm just a big fan of emulators. I just love the fact that with one device, it doesn't matter if it's a desktop PC or a fucking laptop, I can play all generations of consoles. If I want to play a fucking Super Nintendo game, I don't have to fucking build up my Super Nintendo and fucking, you know, plug it into a TV. And let's be honest, playing Super Nintendo games with an old Super Nintendo on a fucking HD TV is terrible. So emulators are an awesome way of reliving old games. The problem is Dreamcast emulation, in my personal opinion, is not really satisfactory. I hope it's called satisfactory. Satisfactory. Like, this, the Dreamcast emulation is pretty bad in my personal opinion. You can play most games fine, I think, with Dreamcast emulation, but you have a lot of visual errors, you have a lot of sound errors. Like in Shenmue, for example, I think you can play Shenmue 1 completely through on a Dreamcast emulator, but sometime Ryu's head is missing or something like that. If you don't take things, you know, if you are not picky or something like that, these are like stuff that you can look over with. But because I want to make like a Sega or a Sega Dreamcast Roundup, I want to give you the best quality possible. Unfortunately, not in video quality, but obviously in the original state of the games. So please keep in mind, if you watch the Dreamcast videos, that it's a fucking SD signal put into my HD TV cards and then upscale to 720p to get a better bitrate on YouTube. So if you are here to see like high quality videos of Dreamcast games, 1080p, whatever, 10-time anti-aliasing and shit like that, this is the wrong place. I'm not playing with an emulator because unfortunately, in my personal opinion, Dreamcast emulation is not really... yeah, it's not really that good. And I think it will not really change in the future because, let's be honest, there's barely a market for Dreamcast emulation. Like I love NES emulators, Super Nintendo, hell, even PlayStation, but like N64 emulation is pretty terrible in my personal opinion already. And yeah, like in my opinion, I would say PlayStation 2/Wii GameCube emulation is better than a Dreamcast emulation. So it would be interesting to see if the people that are behind the Dolphin emulator for GameCube and Wii, if they would actually put their hands on a Dreamcast emulator, what they could do. But again, the emulation scene, I guess it's pretty much dead. Like the last emulator that came out is like updated like 5 years ago or something like that. But when it comes to the Dreamcast emulation scene, I'm actually not that knowledgeable of, because I want to play the shit in its original form. Another thing, what I really like about the Dreamcast, and what especially people in Europe loved about the Dreamcast. People in Europe, like back in the day without internet and without knowledge, and if you didn't import games, had no idea that 90% of the games that came out in Europe were a broken piece of shit. You're probably gonna tell me right now, but Michael, you are a little bit overdoing it right now. They were not broken. Yes, in my opinion, they were broken. A little bit of a story there. Japanese and American games, so 2 out of 3 regions, Japan and North America, that's how the regions are obviously like separated in. These games run on 60 hertz or hertz, you know what I mean. That's the refresh rate, 60 hertz. The problem is the European TV signal is 50 hertz or hertz. So what most games did back in the day, and that was just a lazy converting thing, most games back in the day just got converted from 60 to 50, what means that most games from back in the day, it doesn't matter if it's NES, it doesn't matter if it's Genesis, Mega Drive, Super Nintendo, run 16.x% slower than the American Japanese version. One of the best videos you can actually see is just type onto YouTube Sonic the Hedgehog 50 Hertz versus 60 Hertz and look that video. You will instantly know what I mean. So as a European gamer, you were kind of fucked up all the time with every game. You got bad ports. You got slower ports in gameplay and in music, and sometimes you had like black borders on top and bottom, because there are more lines to draw. There are more lines to draw on a PAL television than on an NTSC television, and it's fucked up. It's fucked up. And the Dreamcast was the first console that actually came with a solution to that. European Dreamcast players were able to select a PAL 60 Hertz option. What means you were able to play the game on televisions that don't support 60 Hertz with the 50 Hertz European mode, or you were able to play on PAL 60, what was the equivalent to NTSC 60 Hertz. And that was an incredible feature. Finally, we didn't have 16.x% slower games anymore. Finally, we didn't have black borders on top and bottom anymore. Finally, we players got the same quality of the game as the Japanese people and the American people. And what Dreamcast did with this, it was kind of revolutionary. Like, today we don't have that problem anymore with HD, you know, with HD you don't have that 50-60 Hertz bullshit anymore. But the Dreamcast actually put in this feature into the console territory, and even the PlayStation 2, like games in 2004 and 2005, still suffered about bad PAL conversions. Like 6 years later, the PlayStation 2 still had bad PAL conversions, what the Dreamcast actually did better 6 years before already. So at that point, the Dreamcast, again, was way before its time. And by the way, I said I want to talk 10 minutes, and then I said I would probably talk 60 minutes. And yes, I'm talking since 20 minutes already, and I'm giving out information after information, and I'm not done by a long shot. Oh my fucking god. But yeah, like I said, the 60 Hertz option, unfortunately, there were some European games that didn't have a 60 Hertz option, like Sega Rally, for example. But out of all the, I don't even know how many PAL games got released. I think it was around 200-ish, maybe even less. There were not that many PAL games. Like, a small percentage of PAL games didn't have a 60 Hertz option, but I would say the percentage is only like in the single digit. Probably like mid-single digit, like 4, 5, 6% of PAL games didn't have a 60 Hertz option. So in that case, Sega was obviously revolutionary again. Speaking about other revolutionary things what Sega did, it was the hardware by itself. The Dreamcast came in with a built-in modem. You were able to connect to the internet, to play video games over the internet, to exchange leaderboards, to exchange time attack times, to play over the internet, but you were even able to surf in the internet or with the in the internet with the Dreamcast. And for back in the day, for 98, 99, that was a big thing. In 99, like if there is a 16-year-old watching right now that was born in 99, for you the internet is totally normal. You wake up and probably the first thing that you do is check your fucking WhatsApp on your cell phone. And this is a totally normal thing. But back in the day, the internet was like a minority. The internet was a luxury item. I actually got the internet 13 days before I got my Dreamcast. I bought the Dreamcast on release on the 14th October 99, and I got internet on the 1st October 99. That's actually pretty funny. But at the same time, I never really used the Dreamcast for the internet. The problem about Dreamcast surfing, I played some games over the internet, but I never surfed over the internet. Like you had a web browser and everything, and that was cool and everything. The problem is the web browser of the Dreamcast didn't support many fonts. It didn't support, I don't know, Flash was around there already. I don't even know. So like browsing the internet with the Dreamcast was not really a good thing to do if you had a PC already. Obviously, if you were not a PC owner, like browsing with the internet was obviously a really, really good thing. Obviously, there was some other hardware. Like you can kind of guess if you want to type an email or something like that. Browsing the internet is kind of a fucking, or typing an email with a controller is kind of a fucking terrible thing to do. So obviously, Sega was thinking about that, and they actually made PC hardware in quotation for the Dreamcast. You were able to buy a mouse for the Dreamcast. Well, we kind of had a mouse already on the Super Nintendo for Mario Paint, and a keyboard for the Dreamcast. So Sega kind of saw the Dreamcast as your all-around thing. You can play games on it, you can hear music on it, because the Dreamcast, you were able to hear music CDs, and you were able to browse the internet. They kind of had a multimedia machine in mind already, what Sony did with PlayStation 3 and Microsoft with Xbox 360. Yes, you were able to mod the first Xbox to a multimedia machine, but the whole concept behind the Dreamcast was that it was kind of a multimedia machine that you can do a lot of things with besides playing video games. So again, in that case, the Dreamcast was extremely revolutionary again. It had a built-in modem. I think in America and Japan, it had a 56.6K modem, and in Germany or Europe it only had a 33.6K modem. If you kind of want to know right now what 56.6K are, God, what is this? Like, you know download rates. Like, our download rates right now in the year 2016, it depends where you live, are between 1 MB a second up until 10, or if you live in Japan, 50 MB a second. Like 56.6K was 4 kilobytes per second. Okay? It was 4 kilobytes per second. We're not talking about 4 MB. We're talking about kilobytes here. Let me actually go to download calculator site. Download calculator. Just to give you a dimension. How big is GTA 5? 50 gigabyte? Let's say you want to download a GTA 5 with a 56.6K modem, okay? You need 2,130 hours, 26 minutes and 24 seconds. That's like, oh my god, that's like 100 days or something like that. Is this true? That's like 100 days. You would, like, if you would still have a 56.6K modem, you would need over wait, is this 100 days? Okay, I'm this idiot right now and have to use a calculator on Windows. 2,130 divided through 24, 88 days. You would need 88 days to download GTA 5 from Steam if you have a 56.6 kilobyte connection. Like, we have to think, like, this is like almost 2 decades ago. This is like the internet that we had back in the day. And if you compare it, how slow the internet was back in the day, it was fucking crazy. Obviously, back in the day, we didn't have that bullshit like patches in gigabyte sizes and everything. Obviously, with internet connections getting faster and faster and faster, it's easier for fucking publishers and console publishers to just fucking bring out broken pieces of garbage and patch it with 500 gigabyte patches in the end, okay? But back in the day, we definitely had a different time. And if you just think about the dimensions, that in 99 for 50 gigabyte, you would have needed 88 days to download. It was fucking crazy. I remember I had ISDN. ISDN was like not 56.6 kilobits. Okay, it was like, I think 64K. So you were able to download with around 7 kilobyte a second. And the biggest thing that I downloaded from the internet was, I think, a demo of Outcast or something like that. And that demo was around 150 megabyte big. And I think I downloaded the demo for... God, I think I downloaded the demo for, well, like 150 megabyte, like half a day or something like that. I don't know anymore. So the times were completely different back in the day. And I'm talking way too much about shit that is not important, do I? But that's how Michael 1985 is. Going back to the peripherals, we had mouse, we had keyboards, because the Dreamcast pretty much was like arcade hardware, and Sega always was a big arcade developer, arcade machines, something that we don't even know anymore in the year 2016, because the arcade culture going into a place with hundreds of arcade machines where you have to put quarters in to get credits is pretty much dead in the year 2016. But because the Dreamcast was able to play arcade games, I think it had like an arcade board. Was it a Naomi board or something like that? I'm not sure about that right now. But it had arcade technology in the console already. It was piss easy for Sega to convert arcade games to the Dreamcast. What means to get even more peripherals. You got like Sega bass fishing, where you had a fucking fishing rod controller. You obviously had steering wheels. Obviously, steering wheels you got on fucking PlayStation already, so that is obviously not a big thing. Like, there is a Japanese train series called Danger Day Go. In Danger Day Go, your goal is to drive a train. It's like Train Simulator. And the game actually came with like a train controller, and in the middle of the train controller, there was like kind of a hole where you were able to put in a cup to drink, like real Japanese train had it back in the day. You had like oh god, how are these things called? Samba de Amigo, maracas? Are they called maracas in English? And before I said something terrible. Yes, you had like maracas. It's like just Google maracas. You probably know what maracas are. Obviously, it had dancing mats. It had so much crazy peripherals. It actually had a microphone, because there was a game where you were able to talk with like a living thing inside the game with a microphone. The Dreamcast was really, really crazy when it came to all that stuff. And there's a lot of crazy Japanese stuff where I'll probably make a special video at one point. I'm talking, and I'm not finding an end or something like that. I'm probably way too fast with my talking. The cool thing is, if you think I'm talking too fast, just slow down the video or something like that. But yeah, we talked about the games already. Like I said, the Dreamcast had around 600 plus games across Japan, PAL, and North America. One thing after, like, the Dreamcast had a really, really short run. The Dreamcast was pretty much dead after 3 years. You can really say that the Dreamcast was dead after 3 years. Like in 98, the Dreamcast started to come out, and I think around March 2001, development of the Dreamcast got killed already. So there was not even 3 years of an active Dreamcast development going on. And there are different reasons for it. I was talking a little bit about the sales figures. The Dreamcast, again, sales figures is obviously another thing where you have different sources and stuff like that. Again, don't always believe Wikipedia, because even in Wikipedia there could be errors, but you can pretty much say that the Dreamcast never hit the double-digit sales. The roundabout sales right now are around a little bit over 9 million units. And if you think about that the Dreamcast only sold 9 million units within its run, within 3 years of its active run, within 2.5 years of its active run, that is actually really, really bad. And you kind of saw already that Sega was running on its last breath. I mean, you have a lot of people comparing the Wii U as bad as a disaster as a Dreamcast. And if you compare it sales-wise, I guess there is a point, because the Wii U is out now since almost, don't let me lie, 3 years, a little bit over 3 years, and the sales figures of the Wii U are, I think, at like 11-12 million. So there is definitely a connection in the sales figures when it comes to Dreamcast and the Wii U, but there is a big difference between Nintendo and Sega. Nintendo has so much money in the bank, they can fucking have like 10 console fails, and they are still doing good. Okay, like I said, we had the sales figures wise about the Dreamcast the official count is 9.13 million. Again, don't believe these counts. It's somewhere between 9 and 9.5 million Dreamcast units, you can say. I talked about 60 Hertz. I talked about how many games there are, and I talked a little bit about the history around the peripherals. Another peripheral was because the Dreamcast was a disc-based system and it didn't use CDs, it didn't use DVDs. The Dreamcast actually used an own format that was called the GD. I don't even know what GD means right now, to be honest. I'm honest, I don't know what GD means right now. I think gigabyte disk. GD-ROM, gigabyte. Yeah, it was gigabyte. They used GDs, and they are called no. Yeah. Oh, God, geez. I'm trying to figure it out in my head right now. So, like I said, the Dreamcast had its own format called GD-ROMs, and they were called GD because GD-ROMs were able to have 1 gigabyte of space in. So you kind of see there already that the Dreamcast had a little bit more space than the PlayStation 1, a lot more space than the N64, and obviously less space than the PlayStation 2 with DVDs. But they used their own format. One reason to use their own format was to counter piracy. The thing with piracy is, many people know, and let's be honest, it's an open secret, the PlayStation 1 was so successful because every fucking guy, every fucking girl and whatever pirated the shit out of the PlayStation 1. The PlayStation 1 was such an success because piracy on this console generation was so easy to do and was just too good to do. Sony knew that most people are pirating their games, but back in the day they pretty much didn't care because they sold a lot of units of the first PlayStation. Like, there were like figures out that a PlayStation owner bought like 1 game per year. And let's be honest, even if you are the most casual of casuals, you have a console, you buy more than 1 game per year. So you can kind of see there that the piracy was definitely a selling point for the PlayStation. But Sega obviously kind of don't want it to have piracy. So they kind of tried it. They tried to conquer it, or they tried to counter it with many other things. But one of the things they tried is obviously the different format. Because back in the day, the highest thing that you were able to get were like, I think, 650 or 700 MB blank CDs. They were not like... That was the only thing that you can do. The problem is, piracy is a thing that was enabled almost instantly on the Dreamcast. I think a little bit. It took like a year or something like that from the Japan release for people to actually crack open the Dreamcast and make people pirate the shit out of the Dreamcast. The thing with the Dreamcast is you didn't even need a mod chip or something like that. With PlayStation or with N64, with N64 you didn't have a mod chip. You had like a cartridge, a special cartridge. But with the PlayStation, if you wanted to play pirated games or backed up games or whatever, you needed to have like a mod chip or any other method of saying to the console that you have an original game in. The problem is with the Dreamcast, there was like a team, they were called Team Utopia, that pretty much brought out a bootloader. It was like a disc, a self-burned disc that you were able to burn. You put in the disc, the Dreamcast was able to read the self-burned disc, and after that you were able to put in any copy of the game that you wanted. At a later point, the scene actually came up with Dreamcast games that were self-booting. So the only thing that you needed to do was download the image, burn it on your most favorite CD, and play the game on your Dreamcast. There was barely any copy protection at this anymore. Like the last editions of Dreamcasts actually had like a copy protection like this, where you are not able to play pirated games anymore. But the last run of Dreamcast, there are barely any Dreamcasts out there that are from the last run in the 2001 era of Dreamcast. So pretty much 90% of people that still have a Dreamcast right now actually have a Dreamcast that is able to play pirated or backed up games without any problem. One thing though, and that's why I obviously burnt the shit out of games in the PlayStation era too. I'm not fucking sitting here and say right now, oh, I'm Michael 1985, I never pirated games. Like, if someone is saying to me that he never pirated games, yeah, shut the fuck up, you're lying, you know what I mean? Of course I pirated PlayStation games. But I never, and I'm totally honest here, I never was really interested in Dreamcast piracy. Why is that the case? For me personally, Dreamcast, as terrible as the copy protection was, as fast as the Dreamcast was open for people to pirate video games, the Dreamcast had the best copy protection against me. Why? Most of the games needed to get downsized in size, because many games came out as a 1 gigabyte thing on disk, and the piracy groups needed to build around the fact that you only have 650 MB or 700 MB blank CDs. What means many games have their audio tracks stripped. Many games have their video cutscenes downgraded. Many games have missing content. Many games that are on 1 disc actually have to be played on 4 discs or something like that. And that was one thing that I never was interested in. I always want to play the best quality of a game. And you don't get that with Dreamcast piracy if you try to burn the games on a single disc. Yes, there are a lot of games where the groups never needed to rip anything. I think a Crazy Taxi, for example. The image of a Crazy Taxi, even on the GD, is like, I think, 300 MB big, so the complete game fitted on a fucking CD. But there were many games, Skies of Arcadia, the Resident Evil games, especially Code Veronica, that needed to get stuff downgraded and shit like that, and I never was really interested in that. I never really wanted to play a game where half of the audio tracks is missing. Like Shenmue, for example. The first illegal scene release of Shenmue had, I think, most of the audio clips stripped down from the optional conversations. You had all the audio and voice inputs from the story conversations, I think, but from the optional conversations, all the audio was missing, all the voice inputs were missing. And let's be honest, playing a Shenmue like this without audio, without voice acting is fucking bullshit. So I never really was interested in Dreamcast piracy, but the hardcore pirates never cared about something like that. A hardcore pirate never cared if an intro of a game was missing. A hardcore pirate never cared if if the bitrate of the video is bad. A hardcore pirate never cared if from the soundtrack, out of 24 tracks, 12 tracks were stripped or something like that. And one of the reasons why the Dreamcast, sales for Dreamcast games were terrible. First, because there were barely any hardware out, and second, because it was so extremely easy to make Dreamcast piracy. Like I said, I personally never cared because I never wanted to play stripped down games like that. But again, the hardcore pirates back in the day didn't care because they just wanted to play the game and they didn't care if there were like bits of the soundtrack missing or whatever. So yeah, this was definitely one thing that was a big problem, that piracy was able to be, like, you don't need it to modify your console. Just get a Utopia boot disk or just later get self-booting images and bam, you were set to go. So that was actually pretty bad already. And it's surprising that Sega actually didn't try to countermeasure it at one point. Maybe they were thinking like Sony and say, okay, because of piracy, we get bigger sales now with the Dreamcast, but they never really did. There's a lot to talk about the downfall of the Dreamcast. Why did the Dreamcast flop so much? You have a lot of people coming out with theories and saying this was it, and people saying like it was only a single reason, and that's totally wrong. The fail of the Dreamcast was because of many different reasons. And one of the reasons is a company that we all love, that is EA. It is a fact, Now it was a fact 10 years ago, and it was a fact 20 years ago, that if you want to be a successful console, you need to have EA on the board. This is just a fucking fact. Why do you want to have EA on the board? One reason, not only that they have okay franchises right now with Battlefield, with Medal of Honor, with, I don't fucking care, Mass Effect, you know what I mean. Another reason, and this is even a bigger deal because these games are selling the most, are the EA sports games. You as a publisher, you as a console publisher, you want to have EA on board because the sports games are the most successful division for EA. They are the most cheapest and the most successful division of EA. Just look at the American sales of an NFL in America. Just look at the European sales of soccer games. Then you see that EA is making the most money right now and back in the day with sports games. So, and one of the reasons, now you're probably asking, why are you fucking putting EA in the mix? What do they have to do with Sega? Well, Sega and EA have a really, really long history. I'm not gonna go completely back to the history, I'm gonna go to the Dreamcast history. But there was a big thing where EA stated, we as a company are not developing for the Dreamcast. All games that we do, it doesn't matter if it's only the sports games or the main games that we had, like Medal of Honor. Like, while the Dreamcast was out, there was Medal of Honor on PlayStation 1. The first Medal of Honor came out on PlayStation 1. Google it, Google the first Medal of Honor PlayStation 1. This game came out during the era of the Dreamcast. A Medal of Honor on Dreamcast would have been mind-blowing with the hardware, you know what I mean? On many other games that I don't think of right now that EA was actually publishing and creating back in the day, but EA had no interest to develop for Sega. Many people are asking right now, why didn't they have any interest of developing for Sega? Because if you think back, the first EA sports titles actually came exclusively on Sega consoles. For the Sega Genesis, until they decided to go multi-platform and bring stuff out on fucking N64 and rather Super Nintendo 2. There is one reason, there are many reasons to be told why EA is not developing for the Dreamcast. Some of the reasons are the total flop of the Sega Saturn. Where EA then decided, okay, the Sega Saturn was an absolute flop, we're not going to support the Dreamcast for that because, the Dreamcast will not sell anyway. But maybe they thought that, but there is a way, way bigger reason why EA did not develop for the Dreamcast. And I'm pretty sure, if I say that to you right now, you will probably not believe me. But one of the reasons, or the main reason why EA did not develop for the Dreamcast was because they were little whiny bitches. If you look at Sega and if you look at the Dreamcast era, you know that Sega had its own sports brand. Sega had its own sports brand. Like, it was called, obviously, Sega Sports. And with their own sports brands, they brought out different games, they brought out different games out of in the sports area. They brought out NBA games, they brought out NFL games, they brought out baseball games, tennis games, and stuff like that. But in that case, it's mostly because of NFL. EA's goal with the sports franchises was always to have a monopoly on sports games. And if you look at sports games right now, EA still has a monopoly on pretty much all of them. On soccer games, on football games, on basketball games. Okay, the last, I think, NBA was terrible. On NHL games, on everything. If you think about sports games, you think about EA. And EA's goal was always to have a monopoly on these games. The thing is, Dreamcast and Sega, how dare of them to be a competitor against EA? How dare of them to make their own sports games? EA wanted to have the monopoly on sports games, even on Sega's consoles, and because Sega didn't say no, we're still gonna do our own sports franchises. EA said, like a little whiny bitch, you know, no, if you make your own sports games, we're not gonna release any game on your consoles. This is the history. This is how it was. Because Sega produced their own sports games that at the time were actually better than the EA games, EA was saying, no, we can't be better than you, we don't want to compete with you because we know we're not better than you, so we're not gonna fucking support your console. And with EA, even back in the day, in 98, 99, 2000, being one of the big publishers, that was hurting the Dreamcast a fucking lot. And you know what the sad thing is? Like, it's not like that EA only did it once. There was another occasion where EA was a little bitch and cried around again because they didn't get what they wanted. Do you remember the Wii U situation? Do you remember that there were talks that Nintendo is using EA's help to integrate an online service into the Wii U, and then the Nintendo decided against it, and then EA all of a sudden said, oh, you decided against our online service. We're not gonna release any games for the fucking Wii U anymore. They released games at the beginning with Mass Effect 3, for examples, but after Nintendo decided that they don't want to use EA's online service, where EA pretty much gets a monopoly over the online of Nintendo, they backed out again like they did with the Sega Dreamcast. And I think that just shows what kind of a company EA is and what kind of a company always was. They don't want to have competition. They want to make their games with the cheapest amount of money as possible with no competition at all. And again, I'm gonna say it one more time. The only reason EA did not develop for the Dreamcast was because the Sega had their own sports games. EA was plainly saying to them, if you make your own sports games on your console, we're not gonna develop for you. That is the main reason. In the end, EA didn't care anyway because the Dreamcast didn't even sell double digits. But this is pretty much one of the stories why, like, let's be honest, if you would have been able to play all the EA games on the best quality of Dreamcast, that would have helped a lot. That would have helped sales a lot. Let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen. Why on PlayStation you still had pixel graphics, with unfiltered whatever and graphic errors up the ass. On a Dreamcast, you would have gotten a crystal clear picture. Like you can kind of compare. You remember the transition from SD gaming to HD gaming? That transition from Xbox Classic to Xbox 360? That was a big transition. Like seeing a PlayStation 2 game and then seeing a PlayStation 3 game was like, oh my god, it's so incredible. It's so sharp. You know what I mean? And pretty much the Dreamcast was that for SD gaming. When you played a PlayStation game and all of a sudden you played a fucking Dreamcast game, that was an HD upgrade, kind of. You know what I mean? Because the graphics were just so good looking. Another thing why the Dreamcast failed was obviously the really, really bad advertisement. The advertisement for the Dreamcast was so extremely bad, I can only say anything about the European and German advertisement campaign. Like, it's mind-boggling or whatever. Who actually decided to make advertisements like that? Like, when in Germany there were spots running of the Dreamcast, they always showed real people. They always showed real people because their slogan kind of was that Dreamcast has up to 6 billion players. That was obviously the amount of people that lived on this planet back in the day. So they kind of always wanted to show the Dreamcast is for the people and the people are playing it. Kind of like the Nintendo Wii approach where Nintendo always showed people playing instead of a lot of game footage. But Sega did it extremely stupid, and in their ads on TV and everything, they had like a 30-second ad, and out of this 30-second ad, you saw 28 seconds of real people doing stuff and 2 seconds of game footage. It was really that bad. I don't know what they were thinking about it. The only thing that they would have needed to show is how the games are looking, how mind-blowing the games are looking. The only thing that they would have needed to do in kiosks, in stores, was to put a Sega Dreamcast next to a PlayStation 1 with Tekken 3 against Soul Calibur. If you would have had something like that you would have compared Tekken 3 graphic-wise with Soul Calibur graphic-wise, Sega would have gotten way more sales, but they didn't do stuff like that. Plus, again, one of the bigger reasons was that Sega lost a lot of trust already with their earlier consoles. The whole Sega Genesis debacle. When they brought out the Mega CD or the Sega CD. Yes, the Sega CD wasn't as bad. It was an add-on. It was okay. But then they brought out the 32X, and after a week of when the 32X was out, they announced the next console already and shit like that. Sega lost a lot of trust with its fans because of all the fucking shit they did. And Sega pretty much noticed early already that they can't do the console business anymore. Like after I think almost 1.5 till 2 years while the console was still running, Sega knew that it's going nowhere. Like the Sega Dreamcast should have never happened. The Sega Dreamcast was the last breath of a dying man, you know what I mean? The Sega Dreamcast should have never happened. The Sega Dreamcast made them so much debt, or however you call it, like that. But it was like it was their last breath to do something in the console genre, but pretty early in development or pretty early in the cycle of the Dreamcast, they knew that it's not gonna help anymore. They made price cuts after price cuts after price cuts. I think after 2 years already, you were able to get a console for $100 already. Just think about it. After 2 years, you were able to get a console for $100. Just think about it right now. That would be now that you would get PlayStation 4 and Xbox One consoles for $100. It's unthinkable. And even at these price cuts, they didn't make money anymore. So the thinking about a transition from consoles to being a game only developer, like the thinking about that started already in the year 2001. And this is now a story what I think is kind of heartwarming. At the same time, people are saying, what is that for an asshole? But yeah, I think in the mid of 2000, a guy took over the president of Sega, and this guy was called, I think he was called Iwao Okawa. Okawa was the last name, and I think the first name was Iwao. And Iwao Okawa, as much as he wanted to help Sega, as much as he loved Sega, he was connected with Sega a long time already. As much as he loved Sega and as much as he wanted the Dreamcast to be a success, he knew already that the Dreamcast will be a fail and that Sega has to change something drastically, otherwise they go out of business. So around the year 2000 Sega started talks already of getting a third-party publisher for other consoles. They cut some deals with Microsoft. If you remember, Microsoft had some Sega exclusives like Jet Set Radio Future, for example, or Shenmue 2 in the American region, and they cut deals already in the year 2000. That they want to be a game-only publisher. And one reason why they were able to make the transition from a console producer to a third-party publisher was because of Iwao Okawa. First of all, Iwao Okawa loaned Sega $500 million of his own personal money to make the Dreamcast development go on. He took his own personal money and put it into Sega. You have to think about that. His personal money. Unfortunately, he died in 2001. I think he was over 70. He died in 2001, and before his death, pretty much on his testament, he said that Sega doesn't have to pay the money back to his family, and he gave Sega all his remaining money that he had in stocks when it comes to Sega stocks and another company of stocks, and he gave it to Sega. But there was one condition. All the money that he gave them worth in stocks, that was around $700 million. Sega got that money, but there was one condition. Sega needs to make a transition from console developer to a third-party game developer. And that's the reason why Sega is still here, ladies and gentlemen. There was one person working for the company, and he gave the company $1 billion of his own personal money to make the company survive. He was on his deathbed and he decided, take my money, take my personal money, survive, make the transition to a third-party publisher. And if you think about it, this is a fucking touching story. This guy had so much love for his company that he gave away probably not all his money. His family probably got a bunch of money too. This guy had so much love for his company that he probably gave away 90% of his personal belongings to the company that he loved so much. And I think it's an extremely touching story, if you think about that. You obviously have people saying, what an asshole! He should have fucking donated that money to help people in third world regions. Shut the fuck up, you know? People can decide what they want, you know, what they make to their money. If someone wants to donate $1 billion to a good cause like that, great. But if someone wants to fucking donate all his money to the company that he loves to death, that's a wonderful thing to do. And he is the reason Sega was able to make the transition from console producer to third-party game developer. Again, he gave him all the money, and there was one condition. Don't make consoles anymore. Concentrate on being a third-party developer. And with that, Sega got $1 billion. And that's the reason Sega is still here right now. That's the reason Sega got a third-party publisher. And again, I think this story is extremely touching, and it shows the love that Iwao Okawa needed to have for the console, or for the company in itself. Let's be honest here. Let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen. It's fucking crazy. In my opinion, it is extremely crazy, but in a good way. You know what I mean? It's not Iwao Okawa, it's Isao Okawa. Sorry, ladies and gentlemen, it's Isao Okawa. Not Iwao, it's Isao Okawa. But yeah. We have the downfall of the Sega Dreamcast. I think I'm pretty much done soon with everything. I talked about hardware. I talked about what's special about it. We talked about the games. We talked about the downfall. We talked about EA. We talked about this and this. We talked about the end of the Dreamcast. Up until this point, there's obviously people still wanting to have another console from Sega, but let's be honest, ladies and gentlemen, stop thinking about that. This is a pipe dream. It's never gonna happen, and it should never happen, because the console market is oversaturated anyway already. We have 3 consoles on the goddamn fucking market. We have Microsoft with Xbox, we have fucking Sony with PlayStation, and we have Nintendo with the Wii or with Nintendo consoles. There is no place anymore for a 4th competitor. Let's be honest here, ladies and gentlemen. Sega is doing what they should do, and that is concentrating on more third-party development. Sega right now actually wants to release a lot of games for PC in the year 2016. One of their pillars, they said, is to bring out console exclusive games that were always console exclusive for PC. You kind of saw that initiative already with Valkyria Chronicles, I think, end 2014 or 13 even. I don't even know anymore. We see it with the Sonic games. Hell, Sonic Lost World came out on PC. I obviously don't judge the game's quality, because Sonic Lost World is a terrible game, and Sonic is like a franchise that fucking ate the dirt like since ages already. But Sega is doing okay as a game publisher, and they should never, ever go back to being a console publisher again. Would be the biggest mistake. The biggest mistake they could do. But yeah, the demise of the Dreamcast, we talked about it right now. Obviously, the PlayStation 2 came out, and because of the Sony PlayStation hype, like many people, first of all, many people lost trust in Sega, what I can clearly understand, and many people were just waiting for the PlayStation 2. If you look here at the dates, in the US, the Dreamcast came out end of 99, and I think the PlayStation 2 came out in the US. God, when was it in the US? Was it November? No, it was earlier. Around summer till fall-ish in the US, the PlayStation 2 came out. So many people were saying, okay, I don't have that much trust anymore in the Dreamcast. I don't have, that much faith anymore in them. And the next PlayStation is coming out anyway in a year, so I'm gonna wait. And I can clearly understand that people lost trust for the Dreamcast. One thing though, what is so mind-boggling, I mean, you always have it like that first-generation games never really look as good as last-generation games. Well, the GameCube kind of proved different, because if you look at the first-generation game, at a release date game called Star Wars Rogue Squadron Rogue Leader, this is still one of the best-looking GameCube games ever made, and it was like a first-generation game. But when the fucking PlayStation 2 came out, people were disappointed. Why? Because the PlayStation 2 was advertised as the incredibly power horse, being the most incredible console and powerful console out there right now. And you compared Dreamcast games with PlayStation 2 games, and you were like, what the fuck? Dreamcast is destroying the PlayStation 2 easily. But obviously we talked about second and third generation Dreamcast games already versus first generation Dreamcast games. Yes, the PlayStation 2 was way more powerful. The PlayStation 2 did games that were completely impossible to do on a Dreamcast. but the Dreamcast was holding well against the PlayStation 2. The first games that really showed that the PlayStation 2 is way superior against the Dreamcast were games like Gran Turismo 3, Jak and Daxter, obviously a GTA 3. A GTA 3 would have been never possible on the Dreamcast, let's be honest here. But the Dreamcast was definitely able to stand against the PlayStation 2 when it comes to the performance. And yeah. And if you compare some games, if you compare Dead or Alive 2 with the PlayStation 2 and the Dreamcast version is 10 times better. But again, this is just a thing. The hardware was known better. The PlayStation 2 is bound like the PlayStation 2 is a complicated hardware to program with, so developers actually needed to get a hang of the PlayStation 2 first. But yeah, obviously the PlayStation 2 was way superior in hardware power than the Dreamcast. Whew. And with that, I really talked about... Didn't I say I will talk 10 minutes about the Dreamcast? And then I said it will probably be 60 minutes, and it really is 60 minutes. I think I gave you most of the information now. I think this is pretty much everything that you need to know about the Dreamcast. We talked about the history, we talked about the demise, we talked about the competition, we talked about the games. We're gonna see the games starting with the next videos. I'm thinking about stuff. We talked about the hardware, the extra hardware. There is pretty much everything set already. We talked about that the Dreamcast was an extremely, that the Dreamcast still is an extremely, the Dreamcast is the fan favorite under the consoles, with a reason. So, yeah. I think we're pretty much done. By the way, on the picture that you see here right now, in Europe, or at least in Germany, I don't know if it was in complete Europe or only in Germany, like the Japanese and the American versions of the Dreamcast, if you see the Dreamcast sign, I don't even know how you want to call it, it's the sign is orange. But for the European version, and I think it was complete Europe, they actually needed to how is it called? Give me a second. I am gonna Google this right now. Not Google, I want to show it to you. There we go. I want to show that to you. So many people, like, there is one difference in terms of hardware when it comes to the Dreamcast, and that is like the logo that you see. You see the logo right now. In American and Japanese consoles, the logo is orange, and in the European versions of the consoles, only Germany, I'm not 100% sure right there, but I think it's complete Europe, the logo is blue. And many people don't know why the logo is blue. In Europe. Well, there is one reason, and now I'm doing something that I should have done before. But there is one reason why the logo is blue, and that is just a plain copyright issue. Let me show it to you guys. Good thing that I'm using OBS right now. There is a German company, and I think that the company even spreads across all Europe, that is called Tivola, and this company still uses the logo in question up to this day. There we go. Do you see that? Let me make it bigger, ladies and gentlemen. There we go. It kind of looks the same. It kind of looks the same as the Dreamcast logo, does it? Yes, it does. And that was pretty much the reason that Sega didn't get any copyright infringement issues. That they changed the logo from orange to blue in Europe, because obviously this company called Tivola that is releasing software and I think books kind of has the trademark on the orange logo. This was obviously only just a little side note that I probably didn't brought to you in a proper manner. I was able to speak for like an hour without, without collecting my thoughts. And now when I talked about that, I was saying all the time. I hope it wasn't that bad, that thing. Maybe I'm gonna cut it out. No, I'm not cutting it out. Because I want you to know why the European Dreamcast logo is blue and not orange. But yeah, ladies and gentlemen, I think with that I really said everything. With that I'm almost at 1 hour and 10 minutes. You can expect the Dreamcast Roundup to be a long-going series. Like I said, I want to at least show you every game that I have in my collection. And believe me, ladies and gentlemen, I have a lot of games in my collection. I hope my Dreamcast is not dying while doing that. The Dreamcast consoles are unfortunately they break really fast. Dreamcast was a console that had a lot of malfunctionings during its cycle, unfortunately. And over the course of my life, I probably owned like 6 Dreamcasts already that all broke down at one point. So yeah, I hope that my Dreamcast is not breaking down or something like that while I do that. And at the same time, I'm hoping that my games are still working. Because if you saw me on a live stream one time when I played Shenmue, my Shenmue disc-free is not working properly anymore. The disc has no scratches. The disc is clean as a baby's anus when it comes out of a vagina. And the disc is sometimes not getting read anymore. I have no idea what this is. So this will kind of be a wake-up call for myself. How many of my Dreamcast games are actually still working? Because unfortunately, Dreamcast games are prone to breaking fast for some reason. I have no fucking idea. So we're gonna see how this goes. I'm gonna do the games not in a special order, like these are the best games, these are the worst games. I will show you the games in a random order. And ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna show you games that I suck at too, for example. I'm bad at fighting games like Dead or Alive, Soul Calibur and shit like that. So don't expect me being the best fucking video game player in all these games. This series is there to give you a roundup at all these awesome, obscure, and terrible games that the Sega Dreamcast had. And with that, I'm gonna come to an end. I think it's time for me to come to an end. If you actually survived until here, I thank you for listening to this shit. And yeah, I will see you, or I will talk to you when I play the first game in the Michael 1985 Sega Dreamcast game Roundup series or something like that. Thank you very much. Thank you very much for listening, and I'm out of here. And you guys have a nice day, because if you actually survived it until here, your head is probably there's probably smoke coming out of your head because I gave you so much information. Have a nice day. Thank you very much, and I'm out of here. Bye bye. Sega.